yourself all the time? So I put my helmet down and I was thinking the whole time while I was walking, oh, no Prashad, this is so bad news, you know. Okay, this is so hard, you know, 8 o'clock at night. So we're driving home. I was thinking the whole time, you know, we're going to get in the temple, it's going to be no Prashadam, I'm going to have to get up tomorrow, and the whole thing's just going to start all over, you know. So we got to the temple. They put us in the, we drove up, I remember we drove up the temple in this car, you know, the old Plymouth, you know. Sometimes Jayananda would get that Plymouth in a tight parking spot, and you know, in New York, and he put it in drive, and he goes, I think we can make it now, you know. He'd pull out, you know, he'd go like, you know, oops, you know, and pull out, you know. So we drove up, and all these Indian people were there, and they were fully, you know, the gold, and the bangles, and the silk saris, and the men were astutely dressed. And we drove up, and Jayananda got this pair of pants for Jambavan. He's a great big tall devotee, and the waist fit all right, and everything, but they came down just past his knees. Looked like clam diggers or something. And they were army fatigues, like jungle pants, you know. And Jambavan put them on the first day, and he said, "Geez, Jayananda, do you think they're all right?" I said, "They look great. Don't worry about it, you know." So we got out of the car. Jambavan's got his pants down to his thing, you know, and I got my colorful welding helmet on, and my earring, you know. Jayananda gets out, and they just started laughing. The whole crew of Indian people just started going, oh, you know. Jayananda went up to him, you know, namaste, you know, and they all broke up again, you know. So we walked into the temple, and they brought this platter of prasadam, you know. It was just huge, you know. And it was like, it mounted into a peak. And right at the top there was these, like a little pyramid of glubjaman balls, you know. And they brought it out, and they put it in front of Jayananda, and I went, wow, this is the most prasadam ever. And they brought out a similar plate for all three of us. And they put us in a back room, like where nobody went, you know. And they said, you know, nothing's too good for the Rath crew, you know. I was thinking, man, this is great. Jayananda patted me on the head, and he goes, "See, you never got to worry about it, you know. You just stick with me, you'll always have plenty of prasadam." So I took it for granted that we would be well taken care of, you know. This one time, Jayananda would always be, he'd just never get into negative talking about anybody. Like if anybody said anything or did anything negative about a devotee or about ISKCON, he'd just kind of go, like a big problem, political thing, he'd just go, yeah, you know, geez, let's get back at it, eh? We got a lot of work to do. He was fixed. He never deterred. And there was this one devotee I remember. He had some problems, and he was always going up to Jayananda about his problems, and you know, revealing his mind, you know. And he was always having difficulty, and Jayananda just kept going, man, if you give to Krishna, you'll never be the loser. Every day he'd say that to the whole crew. He'd go, give to Krishna, you'll never be the loser. Just, you know, you'll be the gainer by millions of times. And he used to say to me, if you're going to lead, work 3 times as hard. Because if you ever lead anybody or anything or any project, he goes, you make sure you work 3 times as hard as anybody, and then people will listen to you. So then I used to see Jayananda, he'd be working about 5 times as hard as anybody, and he'd be out there at the worst conditions. When it got really austere, when the going really got tough, that's when Jayananda would just really start moving. Like, you know, I remember that the fire department came down and closed down our shop where we were making the wheels and stuff, and we thought, we were in complete despair. We said, there's no chance, we can't do anything, there's no, there's no getting out of it, and me and my brother were, you know, in tears, and we asked Jayananda what he thought, and he goes, the only thing I think about is watching Murali go down 5th Avenue on the 19th. He goes, if you guys want to talk about that, I'll be right with you. He goes, but otherwise, let's just keep working, you know. So in this way, he was very inspiring to work with. He was very inspirational devotee. Like whenever he was around, he was a big guy, a very big man, and he also was he emanated positive energy. No matter what kind of negative thing came to him, he'd just turn it around and send it right out positive. He'd look at the guy and just turn his head right around, do double backflips, and the guy would go away going, Jai, hurry ball. He'd come in like, Jayananda, there's problems at the temple, and we're going to do this, and then he'd just go, Lord Jagannath. He'd just be so into devotional service, so into distributing prasadam, and so into giving a Gita out to anybody. We went into this one place, it was the back alleys of Brooklyn. It was a special cheap machine shop that Jayananda found, you know. It looked like it was about 1919 in there, you know. And the guy looked like he hasn't seen the 1970s yet. He had these old glasses, you know, around him like this, you know. And he had this hair that was hanging out sideways, and 3-day shave on this side, clean shave on this side. He's real old, you know. And he looked at us come in, you know, with our shaved head, and he looked up like through his glasses like this, and he said, "Can I help you?" You know, and Jayananda kind of went over to him, and he had a Bhagavad Gita with him. And Jayananda needed some kind of special thing that we couldn't find anywhere, and the guy had it, you know. So Jayananda talked the guy into giving it to him for a Bhagavad Gita. And then the guy took the Gita and he was looking at it, and he was looking at the pictures of Krishna and Arjuna and the disciplic succession, and the guy was just going, "My, this is fascinating." And Jayananda was explaining things to him. When we got out of there, Jayananda was just in bliss. He was just going, "Just see how that old guy had the Gita right in his hands, and he was looking at the pictures." He goes, "Oh, that was just bliss, you know." And he was just really into preaching to anybody, you know. And then in the end, Jayananda, he got these lumps in his legs and in his armpits, and he became really sick. And they told me and Jambavan to have Jayananda only sit on a couch and direct all the things, all the the activities from the couch. And me and John looked at each other and said, "It's going to be tough, you know." So we got down to the site and we got this old beat-up couch out, you know. And we said, "Jayananda, this is for you." And he went, "Okay, thanks a lot, fellas," you know. You know, and then he wouldn't have any part of it, you know. And I remember driving him to the hospital one time for one of his tests, right about 4 days before Rath Yatra. He said, "You know, Murali, I think I got some lumps here, you know." He goes, I don't know what they are, you know. They're giving me some trouble." And by the end, he was literally hobbling around. Like he was like, you know, going to a thing and he'd hobble around. And I remember him walking down the hallway, and me and this devotee Bhaskara, you know, and Jayananda was hobbling down the hallway because his legs weren't working too good anymore. They just weren't working, you know. But he just would say, if anybody said anything about it, he goes, "Just don't worry about it. I'll be all right," you know. So Bhaskara, he called to him down the hallway. He goes, "Jayananda, that body looks like it needs a trade-in." And Jayananda turned around and goes, "Maybe you're right," you know. He just, you know, walked out, you know. So then, at Rath Yatra finally came. We worked that whole night to put the canopy back up, and Jayananda, we were pulling a Baudak, and we were talking about this yesterday. Jayananda was pulling out the carts for the final festival day, you know, and he was just looking at the cart. He was in bliss. He was just, you know, bursting with ecstasy. So like you could see, well, like what I saw Jayananda's face after working with him all these months and just going through all these different circumstances, all these problems. Like one day Jayananda had this tire. Nobody could cut this tire. Nobody. So Jayananda goes, "Nobody can cut it? You know, let me try." You know? So he got this knife and he was cutting it. And he finally had it all the way through, and the last cut, the knife just went into his leg, you know. And it just went all over, you know, just went all over the place. And he just sat down. He grabbed the Gita and he gave a 15-minute class to the crew on the mode of passion. He said, "This is what happens when the mode of passion creeps in." He said, "See now, this is all over the place." And we were going, "Let's go to the hospital, Jenna. Let's go to the hospital. Just a minute." The mode of passion. We finally got him to go to the hospital. He walked in and the doctors just went, "Take him right away. You know, get him in here." And they cut off his pants and, you know, they put the stitches in. I never heard a thing about it after, you know, the stitches went in, you know. So, you know, I mean, I don't even know how he got them out, whether he cut them out himself or what. So in that way, I saw him at the Rath Yatra, and the culmination of all these, it just went through my mind, the whole crew and all these guys and all the, you know, the problems Jayananda had with getting the place and the wood, no money. It was like he came to New York and he said, "No money, no men, no trucks." Like the truck they gave us, the gas pedal broke on it. So Jayananda hooked up. It was like one of those engines right next to it. They took off the cover. They put a block of wood on the carburetor. You put your heel on the carburetor, and you tied a string to your toe. And the toe was hooked to the gas. And then you'd work the clutch and the brake with your left foot, you know. And it was like, you know, and a big stick, you know, was here, you know, and you'd be driving with the toe. And it was like, and one day I was driving, and I pulled around a turn too fast, and I hit a brand new cop car. I put him right up on the curb, you know? And I had my shaved head, I had my toe on the thing. He comes to the door, and I'm taking the thing, I'm unstringing the thing, and I'm looking at him like, oh boy, and he goes, "Son, you better show me your license." So I go, all I had on was a pair of gym shorts. I go, "Officer, I don't have it with me." He goes, He was a real tough Italian New York cop. He goes, well, kid, he goes, I tell you, you better have some identification. And I go, well, I don't have my wallet with me. And he goes, oh, yeah. She goes, well, let's go look at the damages. We get out to the car, and there's this, you know, scrape and a dent and his 1976 brand new cruiser. And I just look at it and go, geez, it doesn't look that bad. He goes, you know something? He goes, I've had a lot of instances with you boys, you Christians. And I went, uh-oh, you know. Here we go, you know. He goes, you know, you're not a bad bunch. And he goes, take off, kid. And I just went, oh, man, this is too much. I told Jayananda about the story. He just let me go. I looked at the car, the scrape on the tent, you know. And he comes to the door, and I'm hooking up the thing to my toe. I'm going, oh, boy. And he goes, unbelievable. And he just took off, you know. So I told Jayananda the story, and he just goes, man, he goes, Lord Jagannath's protecting us on this cruise. There's no question about it, you know. So we were pulling out the carts, and I looked down at Jayananda, and I thought all those things. And he was looking up at Lord Jagannath. He was just in ecstasy. He danced the whole way. There's a film of it, that Rocky Actor film. He was pulling and dancing. I remember my father came, and he was like, my father was not so used to Krishna consciousness yet, you know. And he met Jayananda. Jayananda was the perfect thing to say to him. Jayananda shook his hand, he goes, your boys are the hardest workers I ever met. And my father went, Jayananda, you're a good man. And he shook his hand, and then Jayananda got him right next to him. I mean, I'd never seen my father, you know. My father was right next to Jayananda going like this. Boom! Jayananda! Dancing and leaping, he had garlands. He was right next to Jayananda the whole time, you know. And Jayananda, I was calling Jayananda about this problem on the carts. I was going, Jayananda, and he looked up at me. He was just going, I'm in ecstasy. Bless. He goes, this is just unbelievable. I couldn't even get the message to him. I had to get just a Jumna Maharaj instead. And he just pulled the carts, and then we got down to the site, and we pulled the carts back, and people were coming onto the bars chanting Hare Krishna, and Jayananda was just like busting with ecstasy. I couldn't even, you know, and he told me this one story one time, that he was in India, and he said he was so sick. He was so attached to chanting. He would sit and chant his rounds. Like, in New York, he'd sit down, and everybody respected him, like, he always get these garlands, and about a second after the garland, he'd call some guy over, like real nonchalant, and cut the garland on him and start chanting again, you know. And he'd always have the crew sit next to him, and he'd just chant every round, just sit there, and he would just chant all his rounds. And he'd be done, and he'd go to work. But like, so he was in India, and he said he was so sick he couldn't even crawl. He just told me this story. It was like real matter-of-factly. He goes, I was so sick I couldn't even crawl. He goes, but I dragged myself over to my little altar with Prabhupada. And he said, I started chanting. And he said, you know, Murali, it was the most amazing thing. He said, I chanted just a few mantras, and in minutes I felt great ecstasy of chanting the holy name. And when he said it, I just went, you know, like went right through me, you know, because I knew he was tasting. Like he was tasting the holy name. When he was chanting, when he was going through his devotional activities, he was actually understanding his relationship with Prabhupada. Like on a morning walk we went on with Prabhupada, Jayananda was about 20 feet back, and he would always, you know, be real low profile when Prabhupada was around. But Prabhupada would always ask for him. One time Prabhupada would not leave. He would not leave San Francisco Airport unless Jayananda came and saw him. And then one time Jayananda, finally, Prabhupada called for him 3 times. And Jayananda told the devotee, I'm too dirty to see Prabhupada. I'm too fallen. My place is here at the carts. The festival, I'll clean up. I'll just keep working. It's the older devotees. Senior devotees should get his association. Let them run the movement. I'll just stay here. So finally, at the 4th call, he said, Jayananda must come and see me. He must come now. So Jayananda finally got in his darshan, and he hadn't slept in like weeks. You know, he'd been down. He was working tirelessly for weeks, never taking a nap, never stopping, never thinking of himself. You know, and he got in the darshan, and he just went like this, and he just passed out. And somebody went to wake him up, and Prabhupada said, "Let Jayananda sleep." And so Jayananda just took it like that. So in that way, he was always willing to go the extra mile. And he'd never think of himself. He'd always think of someone else first. He always put the bhakta, anybody, his crew, the devotees, anybody. He would always push them to the foreground. He'd always let them try to lead. He would always glorify them. He'd always make sure they got all the mercy. He would just always be trying to get everyone else to get, here, you go talk to Prabhupada. Here, we going on a morning walk, get up there, you know. And he'd be in the back, you know. Get up there, listen to what Prabhupada's saying, you know. And I remember going on the walk with Jayananda, and we were all packed in a van. And he was super uncomfortable, especially for him, because his head was like hitting the ceiling.